Hi everybody, welcome to Australia at Home and our inaugural Guardian Australia book club. I'm Steph Harmon, I'm culture editor of The Guardian Australia, and I'm very excited to introduce our guests today. But first, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're all on Indigenous land. I'm sitting in my home here on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I know you'll join me in paying respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that this land was never ceded. First up, for some of us are very new to this platform, so I just wanted to give a few ground rules and how it's going to work. This is our first one with Australia at Home too. So if you turn your screen to gallery mode on the top right corner and turn your camera on, you'll get a sense of the literally hundreds of people that are joining today's event, so welcome. Also, if you open the chat on the bottom of the screen, you can talk to everybody at the same time. So introduce yourselves there and keep the chat nice and inclusive. This chat box, this is where you're going to be asking questions to the lovely Julia Baird. We'll be calling up members of the audience during the discussion too and unmuting your mic. So if you haven't asked a question, which is one that we've picked, look out for a message from one of our organisers who'll give you a little bit of a heads up that we will be throwing to you. Finally, I should let you know we are filming this today for a video to run on The Guardian, so please keep it all nice. Guardian Australia's book club is a brand new thing we decided to launch in lockdown, but we are hoping it's going to continue once we're allowed out as well, because who doesn't love talking about books? Each one of these is going to be a bit different. Some will be more like regular book clubs with readers talking to each other. Some are going to be panels, and some, like today's, are going to be conversations with authors. Which brings us to our author today, Julia Baird. Julia's book, Phosphorescence, on awe, wonder, and things that sustain you when the world goes dark, could not have been better timed. This book was also handpicked as one of Guardian Australia's 12 unmissable books. That's 12 books in 12 calendar months that we thought worthy of celebration. She's here today in conversation with the wonderful Michael Williams. I'll throw to them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. It's very exciting. And how bizarre to have a book club in this distanced form. The strangest thing about this kind of book club, obviously, is by doing it at 1 in the afternoon, many of you will be significantly less drunk than you would be at a normal book club. But I hope that means that we have a robust and generous and warm and friendly conversation. The thing that's strangest about this ISO time, I think, is that we no longer greet one another by saying, "How are you?" That suddenly feels woefully inadequate. So we find ourselves saying things like, "How are you holding up?" or "How are you doing?" So I'm going to have to start with a "How are you bearing up," Julia?
I'm holding up okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been working so hard at this time. I mean, I think for some people it's got a little bit quieter. Some people, you know, have been like, in order to report on this properly, we've all kind of been going around the clock. So weirdly, we've barely paused except for weekends now. How are you holding up, Michael?
I have 2 small children who are 10 and 8. So the distance learning thing has been a large part of existence over the past few weeks, which is to say I've been holding up extremely badly and about what the attention span of my respective children is, which is anywhere between low and non-existent. It's a wonderful time.
Yeah, right.
But I'm super excited to be talking to you today. And when Steph suggested your book as the first one for the Guardian Book Club, I was thrilled because, as has been widely noted, it is a book that feels extraordinarily timely. It's a book that is about how we might cope and how we might take the time to understand the world in which we live and our place in it, and take a slightly more measured approach. Does it feel a bit surreal to have written a book for the age?
It really does. Yeah, I'm not used to being at sync with the age at all. So yeah, it does. But, you know, I mean, describing this to someone the other day, it was more, there was nothing like strategic in my writing of this book. I didn't sit down and go, you know, I really detect a gap in the market for my views on bioluminescence, right? It wasn't like that. It was, and even like, not my Australian publishers, but my American publishers were initially quite unsure about it because I'd just written a biography. Why wouldn't you just write another biography? But for me, this was just, I was like, I just have to get this stuff down. If there's just a bunch of stuff, I just have to write. And honestly, if there'd been like a handful of people that had found it of any comfort or thought-provoking when they were going through some rubbish themselves, then that would have been great to me. It was kind of, you know, in a case of emergency, smash glass thing. And then suddenly when the book came out, there was a lot of glass smashing around the place.
I really want to dig into, I think the subtitle of the book carries with it a lot about why people are finding it so prescient, and in particular, the use of the words awe and wonder, and the idea that this is a kind of search for those things in as much as it's a search for meaning. I know you wrote much of this book during periods of your medical treatment and extreme pain, and I'm curious about whether initially you were writing with an audience in mind, or whether you're writing as part of a personal exploration. Were you writing for your own comfort, or did you anticipate that it might go further?
I was kind of writing a lot of it for my kids, as I was saying, to kind of get stuff down. When you've been faced with your own mortality and there's a bunch of stuff you have to write, you do get this urgency about it. You know how Dorothy Hewitt, she once said that, she said, like, I have a whole world in my head and 3/4 of it will be buried with me, right? And my best friend and I used to always talk about that like it was a horrific thing. I now think it's probably a good thing that not all of our worlds or all of our thoughts are kind of out in the world, but that sense of, there's stuff I really care about, there's stuff I've thought about for a long time, I kind of have to write about it. And the thing about awe and wonder, I mean, it's so instinctive to so many of us, but I don't think we often, we realize how incredible it is and how delightful, but we don't think about how do you factor those things into your lives so you live it deliberately. You deliberately pursue them, you kind of hunt them down. And we also don't think about the fact that those things can sustain us. It's almost like it's a mental health thing to force ourselves outside, or to think about things bigger than ourselves, and to feel small, and how important it is to feel small. So I think it was kind of from those impulses. And I was thinking about it a lot, you know, when I was going through it. Why was I so craving that kind of ocean swimming and sitting outside? And why was I so, like, it's kind of like people who are really sick are a bit this, or have been really sick, are kind of the same as like stoners or people on drugs, on, you know, in some way, when they're kind of like, oh my God, look at that flower. Did you see like how amazing the sunset was? Like, amazing. Because you're just like, this beauty is like sustenance. Like, sometimes it's not just an aesthetic thing. Sometimes nature you can really drink with a straw. And it's not just about individual making yourself feel better. Like, the more we connect in that way, this was, I was really interested to dig into the science around us, that the more we experience awe and wonder, the more likely we are to be altruistic and to think about other people and to care about other people. And there's a growing body of research into awe that I just found completely fascinating.
I think that the scientific element's really interesting, because as in the book you go on a journey kind of looking into both literal and metaphorical bioluminescence and phosphorescence. Yeah. I'm struck by the question about whether explanations rob us, are the antithesis of awe and wonder, whether awe and wonder relies on mystery, relies on us filling the gaps ourselves, our own explanation, our own understanding, and whether there's a point at which drilling into the science or drilling into the kind of mundane explanation about algae or whatever somehow denies that wonder. Did you have that experience, or the opposite?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think you've got the soul of a poet then, obviously, Michael. Like, I've always loved that G.K. Chesterton thing when he talks about the difference between the poet and the mathematician. And the poet tries to get his head into the clouds, and the mathematician tries to get the clouds into his head, and it's his head that splits, right? But I actually think a lot of scientists are very poetic, and you can't, and are driven by mystery and wonder. And they'll find some answers. They won't have all the answers, you know. And so I do now know that neon blue and the waves that I've kind of danced about with my kids is caused by dinoflagellates, these little like flagellates, these little phytoplankton that, you know, are stirred up chemically by movement. And there's a bunch of theories as to why. Doesn't stop me enjoying it anymore. And I tell you what I did love about, particularly about bioluminescence, was the idea that So after the First World War, after there's these submarines who had their whereabouts given away because they were glowing blue, and then they were kind of shot and destroyed. You know, the US government and as well as the Russian governments tried to look into it to work out, well, hang on, how can we use this in our war efforts? Like, what can we do to conceal our submarines? Or maybe it'll be of use to us to like be able to shower certain areas with this stuff so we can see when these things are coming. But they couldn't. It's really difficult to harness and to control and to predict. Although my friend Darren Saunders, who I quote in the book, who's a scientist, he actually forwarded me a study the other day saying that they're going to start looking at being able to try to predict when those red tides occur, which might give us a bit more of a sense of, quick, it's happening down the south coast, there's going to be some beautiful neon waves. And I agree with you a little bit. Like, I was like, excellent. But I love the fact that you just have to stumble on this. So yeah, it's a bit of both.
I definitely don't think they're mutually exclusive. I do like the epigram you have at the beginning of the book from Emily Dickinson, phosphorescence. Now there's a word to lift your hat to find that phosphorescence, that light within. That's the genius behind poetry.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in that relationship between poetry and science, in how you tracked this stuff in the book, because it seems to me you're not trying to offer glib solutions. You're not trying to offer a prescription for how people might feel better about how they go about their life, particularly in hard times. But you are trying to find a way to capture the ways you found solace through your own difficult periods.
Yeah.
Did you feel that internal tension between science and poetry? Did you feel...
No, I felt more that I would be driven by the poetry of it or by the instinct of it. Right? So why is it that a cuttlefish, seeing a cuttlefish, and they're back in the bay now, can just so completely blow my mind? Why is it when you're standing like dwarfed by these absolutely enormous trees, like we all know instinctively, right? There is something incredibly restorative about that. Like, why? And then I'd try to write about it, and then I would kind of look in the science to see what they'd done and how they measure it. I mean, one of the ways they're trying to measure awe is through goosebumps, which I think is really fascinating. And ways in which they try to measure awe, they've had like, they have people walking through redwood forests, standing next to T-Rex skeletons, and then after they've had these experiences, which make them very small, they'll do things like, if someone drops a pen nearby, will they be more likely to pick them up? And people who've had the experiences of awe have. They're trying to give people the experience of kind of going into space. So I think that for me, with all the sophisticated instruments of science, some of it will appear like a clumsy look at what is kind of poetry, you know what I mean? Like, and it'll be tiny little snapshots that might nudge us towards, with 1,000 caveats. There's always, you know, but I tell you what I did find overwhelming was the science around green. Merely the sight of green, like we know that you know, being in nature is good for you. Like, we all know this, right? But the fact that, like, to have it on your street corner, to have it in your neighborhood, they did like 90,000 kids who grew up with more green around them when they were kids, less likely to have mental health problems when they're older. Huge numbers of people. And even just the sight of green, like they measured it for prisoners who looked out onto green as opposed to those who, you know, just saw brick walls, and they were less likely to complain of mental and physical ill health. Same thing happens with people who are recovering from illnesses and they're in hospital. Those who had a side of green were less likely to get, you know, call for painkillers and more likely to get out of there more quickly. I mean, Florence Nightingale noticed this back in the 1850s and 60s. So to me, I think the sheer volume of this stuff, and that it was spreading around the world, and that it also happened to coincide with that tipping point about just a bit over a decade ago, when we became a world that was more urbanized, that more than half of us living in the cities. I think we will begin to ache for nature in ways that scientists are trying to understand and poets already do.
No, I think that's right. And I think it wonderfully encapsulates the way in which those scientific studies, more information, can enhance wonder rather than diminish it. We're going to go to our first question from a book club participant, Russ Ayres. Russ, are you there? Can we grab you? Please enjoy the theatre of this. Russ may not be on microphone, so I'm going to ask his question for him. Right, one last chance for Russ.
Yep.
Oh, hi, Russ.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering if... Sorry, my dog is barking now.
Sorry, my dog's here too, yeah.
I was wondering if you were influenced at all by Inga Clendin's wonderful book, The Tiger's Eye, and her recording of her experience of serious illness.
Oh, wow. Do you know what? I love that you mentioned her because I love her writing so much. And when I was talking to my friend Jock about the book and how it wasn't really written in a very, like, what's the word? Easily categorizable style. I do think about Inga Clendin and Drusilla Majeska and people like that who can often write in fragments really beautifully and do it really well. But no, I haven't looked at that. And yeah, I really must. Yes. So thank you. Did she write? What was her finding?
She writes about her experience of hospitalisation with serious liver failure. And the tiger's eye is her metaphor for what it feels like to be in that sort of otherworldly state of serious illness and sort of in the world but not in the world.
Yeah, right. I know. For me, I was a bit like, I don't know if you've seen Stranger Things or not, but that sense of when someone's got that, like an illness, or someone has the thing from the what's it, the underside, the underneath, whatever it is. You're walking around the world normally, right, and trying to function normally, but every now and then you'll get kind of a flash of the horror, like you simultaneously inhabit the other kind of fears and anxieties. But thank you, Russ. I will look that up.
Okay.
Clendin also brought out a collection of essays later in her life called Agamemnon's Kiss that has a couple of essays that explicitly talk about the relationship between her kind of scholarly mind and her writerly mind and pain, and what it was to seek refuge in doing the kind of work that she understood and she devoted her life to at times when everything else was a bit blurry and hazy. And
yeah, right. That
definite comfort in turning something into a project that could be written about was something that she identified.
Yeah, right.
What accounts did you read in particular for comfort during that period? What did you read to kind of give yourself the consolation and the sustenance that you describe so beautifully in the book?
I wish I could say it was something cerebral. I honestly watched a lot of trash during that period. But I was also just getting out as much as I could. Hey?
Don't rush past that, Julia. Not trashy. Oh, sorry. Don't rush right past it. You have to tell us how trashy.
Oh, trashy. So if we're talking about last year, and that was the worst because I just had a long period where I just wasn't getting better. So just my recovery was just a long time. I watched all of Nashville beginning to end, day and night for a while, actually. So I was watching a lot of rubbish on TV. I just wanted to be absorbed and I wanted to be somewhere else other than my own head. And I didn't want to have to think too much. When I was pottering around and reading things, I was reading Mary Oliver, her poetry, Joan Chittister, who I really love, her kind of reflections, because she's such a, I don't know, I just love her take on being outwards, her living in community as a nun, and the fact that that's such a, her views are so radical. And I know she was disinvited by was it the Melbourne Archbishop in her trip to Melbourne recently? Anyway, those views still considered quite radical. Yeah, it was those kinds of things. I potted around a lot, but I did get, as you were talking about with Inga, I did get a lot of joy from just going, okay, I can probably write for an hour now, and I would just dip into my book and then just head off on some kind of tunnel. And I'd look at what Carl Sagan, and I loved reading about how the astronauts wrote about the Earth and all those kinds of things. I just pulled in so many different fragments. I read Thomas Merton, to be honest, it kind of impenetrable in some parts, but other parts great, yeah.
We have a question from Lucy Clark. And I failed to check whether Lucy was online before I threw it to her. She's not on chat. I'm going to read it out for her, though. Given what you've learned about life and mortality through your own experience. How have you faced the global pandemic? And what's your advice for people experiencing existential anxiety?
Existential anxiety. You know, honestly, to get out of your head as much as you can. Like, I think really, you know, self-care and all that stuff is really important. But I think when you're really at a point of despair, I don't know. I mean, that's what I've kind of always done. The thing is, it's completely different for everyone. And as you said, I haven't been prescriptive at all. I really wrote about what kind of worked for me. And what worked for me when I was just in the pits and at a real nadir, and I just felt like I didn't even know if I was going to get up again. Just to, I forced myself to get outside as much as I could and to pay attention to the world as much as I could, and even the little things. And it's funny how those things can sustain you, and to pay attention to people around you. And if I'm having a really crap day, week, year, I will be like, okay, I'm just despairing, right? So that's just there. So at the end of today, I'll still be despairing. Like that's probably, I can't change those facts of that situation, but I can probably do something for someone else today. And then if by the end of today, at least I'll feel better about that. And we are seeing so many examples of that at the moment. I actually think it's been quite beautiful. The way we've seen people respond to each other, the way we've seen people drink in art and be creative and check in on each other. It's just a completely different nature of conversation. I mean, you started off, how are you holding up? There's a recognition of like a fragility at the moment. And I think that's partly, I wrote that book out of that saying that we're all vulnerable. We don't know what's going to hit us at any given time. There are so many things way beyond our control. And I became friends with this guy who's this banker in the US. And he contacted me after I wrote a piece. I wrote one piece only for the New York Times about being sick. And he contacted me, we became friends. So it's this weird thing of like, here's this guy who has his own private planes and lives in a world like way beyond me. And here's me, you know, just a writer living in Australia on, you know, not a very massive wage. And but we sat there and we spoke about what it was like, the moment when everything is stripped away from you. And really there's incredible impotence. So what do you do in a moment of impotence? You will lament and gnash your teeth and rail and I don't know, whatever it is you need to do. But there are also things that, and again, like resilience and getting beyond thing isn't like, there's no simple thing for it. There's no like pat answer, right? And it won't necessarily just take a week and it won't necessarily take a day, but you can learn to focus on the things that will give you the tiniest incremental joy. And before you'll notice, you're putting one foot in front of the other again, even if that's all that, that's all that you're able to do.
Julia, for those who haven't had a chance to read the whole book yet in the book club, because there's always some in a book club, can you explain the Stockdale Paradox to them? Because I think that's a really interesting.
Yes, but I just remembered something I was going to say at the end of that thing as well. Like when I say like, how do you get through angst or how do you get through a difficult time? Because this is, you know, writing about like when you've been through trauma and what's that like and how do we all like sustain ourselves when things are dark. It's not like saying, oh, you know, you've lost your job or, you know, you've lost a member of your family or something really horrific has happened. So you just go and lie under a tree and everything's going to be okay. And it's not about being divorced from the rubbish that we're dealing with, you know, on a number of levels in terms of the economic crisis, in terms of climate change. But it's saying that right now we need our strength, right? More than ever. And you have to work out the things that will give you strength. And it's about thinking about that. The Stockdale Paradox is based on this guy called Jim Stockdale, who was a pilot for the US during the Vietnam War. He was taken, his plane was shot down, he was a prisoner of war, and he was tortured absolutely horrifically for several years, came back kind of a scarred man, but he psychologically got through it. And the way he did that, he said afterwards, it's become known as the Stockdale Paradox, is that you're entirely cognizant of the reality of your situation. You know the crap that you're in, right? You're not going to pretend about that. You're not going to gloss over it. Yep, these seem to be the facts. But at the same time, you retain the hope that you will prevail, on the belief that somehow that you will prevail because of it. And he said it was the optimists, the people who were like, all right, we're going to get out by Easter. Okay, we're not out by Easter. By Thanksgiving, nope, not by then. By Christmas. And then they're the ones, he said, that died of a broken heart. But I just found something really sustaining about that, because you don't want to be just reflexively, not everything's going to be okay, but you want to be like, well, maybe it will be. Maybe we can get through this. Maybe there's ways, if we look through, you know, some of the ancient paths that have been trodden, some of the people that have been there before, and some of the horrific things that people have lived through before, maybe we can get through this, and maybe we can learn about what it is that makes us who we are. So, yeah, interesting.
I find it really interesting, that question about how useful optimism is as an impulse, and whether optimism inevitably comes from a place of privilege, that you have to have had particular life experiences in order to be able to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Would you, prior to your horror couple of years, were you an optimistic person? I mean, how much were these lessons, these things that you discovered about how to live your life, a revelation and a kind of expression of a change in how you saw the world? And how much of them were you tapping into pre-existing strengths?
Both. I mean, I talk in the beginning of the book about how I was going through this really hard time, and I spoke to this counsellor, and I was really heartbroken, and I really was genuinely like, man, I do not know how I'm going to get through this. I just don't even know. And he was like, well, Julia, like everything that you've ever been given, every book you've ever read, every like poem, every hug you've ever been given, every member of your family, every friend, every experience, this is it now. This is when all of that matters. And that stayed with me, because I like the idea that you somehow have a reservoir within you of things that you've thought about or things people have told you. And I definitely have drawn on all of that. Yeah, and so optimism can take on so many different flavors. I think I struggle with some of the positivity movement, partly because the language is really cliched, and also partly because you can see, I mean, there's a history of employers pushing positivity at the same time that, you know, workers' rights and living conditions are being stripped away, and you don't want to put it all on yourself like it's an individual pathology, as opposed to you really labouring under, you know, extremely difficult circumstances. That's particularly in the case in the US, I think, with the positivity. And now also the wellness movement, as though it's kind of just about smoothies. And, you know, not about the fact that you haven't got health insurance and you're a casual worker and you haven't got secure employment. I mean, I can't, like, that to me is a problem with that whole way of thinking. But then I go back to, as I was saying to you, at the same time, what is it that gives you strength? And how much of that do you draw from, I don't know, people around you, or having a sense of purpose, or the work that you do, or, you know, the world outside your door. And I've just had so much correspondence from people who that kind of seem to resonate with. And someone asked me the other day if you can like develop, or like if that's something you develop over time or wonder. I actually think it's something you lose over time. Like, I think we have it as kids. And that capacity, you know, that's why having little, I mean, yours are a bit bigger now, Michael, but remember when they're small and you sit with them and you're like, you know what, that elephant is amazing, or that leaf, like, you're right, that is incredible. And you sit and stare at this thing, and then, you know, time goes on and you kind of forget about all that stuff again. But I do think you can live, you know, deliberately in a way.
I couldn't agree more. We have that drummed out of us, and kids approach it with a way that is deeply heartening. That leads to a beautiful question we have from Delwyn Reardon. Delwyn, are you there?
Yeah, hi Julia. Thanks so much for your book. I'm really loving it.
Good.
I work as a social worker with people who are facing severe, mostly chronic illness. Yep. And I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on how people who haven't really been in touch with awe and wonder might be encouraged to sort of be more open to that, or to lift their view outward.
That's a really good question. And I have to say, I have immense sympathy for chronic illness, and partly because of what like last year was like for me, because it was such a long period of really horrible pain. And do you know what? I found it's really hard to be a good person. Like, that was, I might need to write about that, because you're so like, when you're in pain, like, you're so kind of angry, like, it's hard to get out of it. It's really hard to properly function. And you're surrounded by like people who aren't really in very much pain, who can carry on about a whole bunch of nonsense. So I have so much sympathy for that. And the sense of like being dragged out into awe, again, it's just like back to paying attention to the world, don't you think? Like, just to getting out to a place, you know, and might not, as I said, this might not be the first time, a place that you love, and it might not be the first time. They call them therapeutic landscapes, which is a really ugly place for saying, you know, that tree you used to sit in when you were a kid, you know, when things got tough. And kids do have that instinct of when they have fights with their family or whatever, they often go and hide in a nature spot. I used to anyway. And, you know, I write in the book about this friend of mine, Shane Clifton. He's this really wonderful theologian, and he a really thoughtful man. And when he was about 40, he had a terrible accident on his bike, and he became a paraplegic. And he spoke to me about how hard it was to find, you know, you just go through very dark places. And he loved surfing. He was a surfer, but to go to the beach for him was really painful. So, but he kept going. And like a few years in, he suddenly said he was sitting at the beach one night, it was this incredible sunset, and he realized that beauty was filling him up and was giving him strength in a way. And now I always see on his Twitter account him putting out photos of the beach. And I found that really fascinating, actually. Firstly, something won't necessarily come easily. Secondly, you kind of pursue it. Thirdly, it seems really obvious, but small things can really buoy you, like, and give you delight. So does that answer it at all?
Yeah, they're great thoughts. Yeah, okay. You're really talking about taking yourself back to something special, back to something meaningful, and looking for those places, whether they're big or small. So I think that, that's great.
Yeah, something that will have triggered like something in them, or something that they will have referenced, because not everyone's going to have the same response to all kinds of things. So it's kind of drawing people out. But anyway, you do really important work, Delwyn. Good on you.
Thanks, Delwyn. On that question about kind of deriving meaning, we have another question from Carol Reed. Carol, are you free?
Hi, Carol.
Hi. Yes, Julia, I've loved your book, and I've actually bought 5 copies for some young friends of mine, which I think is so inspiring. I'm a retired Anglican priest, and I understand from your book, clearly faith is an important part of your life, and there are so many young people now, and especially the young women that I sort of walk beside in their faith journey, who are really disaffected by church, and are really looking for answers. They just don't feel they can go to church anymore. They're just so put off by the whole institution and whatever. And I love your examples of the churches that you've found in Sydney, and again when you were in Melbourne. And I wonder what sort of advice you would have for young people today, and what part faith could play in their lives.
Well, thank you, Carol. You're a rare breed, of course, in Sydney. We can't have female priests still. So I think people forget that, how astonishing that is. And I do actually think that that's been I was surprised by that response to a lot of people writing to me saying that people who have left the church or just couldn't go into the church because of attitudes to women, or because of abuse stuff, or because of a whole bunch of triggering or traumatic or just off-putting things. And I completely understand it, because, but then you're right, like, how else do we talk about it? I think I would say to those people, as someone who has struggled with the institutional church for my whole life, that there really is some wonderful writing out there and some wonderful people out there, and that's the joy of the web, right? Like, and I write about Nadia Bolz-Weber. I love her. And I kind of love her spunk and her attitude, and she's got a whole gang of women with her that are quite refreshingly irreverent, it's a whole other conversation we can have over like a case of wine, Carol, because I feel that there's just been so many kind of like major issues with the church, but feminism tried so hard for so long to get it to change from the 1840s, when women were writing the Women's Bible, right? In the 1970s, women basically are like, well, we've had it. You guys are going to be the enemy. Feminism goes off this way. And then to be both a feminist and have a faith is seen as a really peculiar thing by both sides a lot of the time. But I just sometimes, I just wonder why you would leave God to one side of politics and what that's meant for expressions of faith elsewhere. But, you know, I was listening to Alice Walker the other day. There's a great podcast that Cheryl Strayed's doing at the moment. And she was saying, well, you know, when I was 12, I gave up on the church and I went into nature. And that's it for me, you know, and a lot of people do that. And that's how a lot of people talk about, you know, Germaine Greer says she doesn't believe anything in the Bible, but she thinks it's a great document to the human desire for transcendence. So as you can see, I'm talking on and on. That's what I would say, Carol, them to just go out and explore. There's people out there doing really interesting things way beyond what, you know, patriarchs who would tell us to be quiet are doing.
Yes, you're quite right. And I love that comment that you made about the church needing to return to its core business of preaching and practicing a gospel of love, that whole inclusivity aspect. And I think that's going to make a lot of difference too. And I'd love to see that happen in my lifetime too.
Me too. I just stop the preaching stuff, like just, you know, except for Nadia, people like that who are really good, but just, you know, roll up your sleeves and get alongside people. I think that's right.
Yeah,
thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Carol's friend making a cameo appearance on the couch.
It's like Carol's
he's on his iPhone. He's on his iPhone.
Right. Please see him there. He's paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, those angry birds aren't going to attack themselves. I think we have a question from Jamie Quinn. Jamie.
Yeah, hi Julia. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the old trope that artists need pain or trauma to create great art. Have you noticed a change in your writing since your illness? And if so, what do you think that might be?
Yeah, it's like after the first time I got sick and after I came through it, I was like, wow, I really have learned so much. And I really, you know, I don't know, it made me probably a lot more candid or a lot more bold. And I think in my work, I was like that generally because I was like, well, this is it. I'm not going to change, right? You just realize that, you know, you always think, oh, this is who I am. So kind of deal with it. I got a little bit like that. And maybe that was like that in my writing as well, like less afraid. Yeah, maybe a bit honest. I don't know. But then the second time I was a bit less like, okay, I kind of got the lessons. The third time I was like, all right, I'm done. I don't need these lessons again. You know, like that's really been driven home. I do think there's interesting though. I was talking to my son the other day about how many writers and artists, and I'm sure you, Jamie and Michael, will be able to reel them off probably even more quickly than I would. Those that have had really interesting childhoods, that have had periods of illness or like polio or isolation, and have kind of, I don't know, and then they've had kind of creativity spring from that somehow from that ever since. So I was trying to talk to my kid about pandemic writing and so on, because he reckons he's coming up with a book. I don't know what it actually is. So yeah, I do think, I mean, people, you know, do what they can with what they've got. And if you've got a period where you're on your own, mainly because you're sick, and dealing with kind of some dark stuff, it will somehow shift you. But I think the expectation that you have would have to be, I think I kind of push back about any expectation that you come out of a, you know, like more, you know, profound or shinier, you know what I mean? I was really conscious about the phosphorescence as well. I didn't want to be like, hey, you come out of this and sparkle, right? You don't at all. It's about maintaining some kind of light when things are really, really super grim. But yeah, you do. I think, you know what? I think, I'm thinking out loud now, obviously, that a lot of it is about recognizing what suffering does to people, and suffering, you know, is a completely humbling thing in not the sense of like ego or not ego, although it certainly would strip that, but in the sense that this is what we share, and that we share it, and we've got to get each other through it, and you have a bit more of a sense in a visceral way of what other people go through. And there are so many people all around us who are suffering or are grieving, and we just need to walk alongside and kind of help each other get through it. And I quote Nick Cave in the book, because you know, obviously he dealt with the death of his teenage son, and when he says he really became acutely aware of that in the community that has formed around him, and he said, you know, the purpose of life is to try to actively reduce one another's suffering. So yeah. That's right.
Thank you. I think also maybe it takes away some pretense and helps you find your authenticity a little more as well.
I think that's totally true.
When you are by yourself.
Sorry,
No, that's it. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that's right.
I should note we have a little backlog of questions there, so I would encourage you, if you have questions for Julia, to get them in sooner rather than later, so that we can hopefully get to as many of you as possible before the book club is done. That question about that question about how you express yourself. There is an anonymous question on the feed that's asking about how you decide how much to reveal of yourself when you're writing about something so personal. And I'm curious about that, because so much of this was written at a time when you were working out your own ways of coping. To share them on the page is an incredibly brave and bold act. Tell us.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm a really private person. So for me to do it, even like the first piece I wrote, as I said to you, I wrote one piece in the Times before I wrote this book. Like, even to talk about my organs, like I just wasn't really that comfortable in doing it. And I'm shifting in my chair as I say this because of that. But there were a couple of things, I mean, Jamie's talking about being authentic. I think that's that sense of like, this is the situation that I'm in. This is where I find myself. Boots and all, warts and all, missing a few organs now. But I did find that part of reading my audio book was harder than having written it. And that was interesting to me. To actually speak something was more confronting than writing it down. But part of it is when you've kind of lived through trauma and stuff, and as I was talking earlier about, recognizing other people going through it, it's just about being straight up about what, very many of us dealing with it, and trying to put words around it without kind of overwhelming people with physical details,
I think one of the things you do so beautifully in the book is the ways in which it kind of transcends and crosses different genres. Like, there's a real danger, I think, with memoir of survivors of trauma or pain or illness, that the work can be read as a prescription for a good way of surviving, a good way of getting through, that somehow you're a model. And I have to say, I read it and I did think regularly reading the book, Julia Baird is a much better human being than I am.
That's what I wanted you to think, Michael.
Yeah, no, it's really, I resented you deeply.
Good.
Because you managed to find this kind of stillness and this calm and this, I think I would have been suffused with rage. And I'm interested, as a journalist, has it made you less patient with idiocy? Or have you now found your center of calm and you can have that apply to everything you do?
Yeah. I am not patient with first world stuff, like, at all. But as in first world, like as in complaints about trivial stuff. I really have kind of lost a bit of my tolerance for that. Do I have moments of rage? I did last year. I was telling you, like, when I was in that pain, I was like, wow, I'm kind of becoming a cow. I actually remember I bumped into Lee Sales on one of my first days back at work, and I was like, I think I've become like a bit of a bitch. And she's like, well, that's good. That's an improvement. My best mate was like, this is how you're supposed to be. This is how normal people are. You've just been too nice. So I was really mad. And you're just tight with dealing with pain. Like it's just taking up all of your resources. So if anyone's out there is dealing with chronic pain, man, I'm just so with you. But anyway, so as a journalist, do I still sometimes rage? You mean? I don't rage a lot, but I kind of maybe rage at like lack of action and things, those kinds of things. Some of my personal beliefs or political beliefs or lack of stuff. But really, when it comes to patience, it's about, I don't know. Like I was reading something about, can women have it all? The other day. I was like, seriously.
Thank God someone finally wrote that article.
Yeah, that's right. Right, because all the women I know are sitting there saying, oh, I really think I can have it all. Like, what? Have you ever met an Indigenous woman who said to you, I just can't work it out? Can I have it all? Like, you want me to rage on that for a little while?
No, I'm pleased to see it sitting there just below the surface.
Yeah, good.
It's very comforting. Tony Wren, are you there to ask your question?
Oh, hi, Tony. Oh, you're on mute. Can you hear her, Michael?
No, I can't.
I can now. Is that better?
Yeah.
Hi. I think my question struck a chord. I was really struck by how beautifully brown the book is.
Yes.
And it really added to my enjoyment of reading it. And I just wanted to know how you got it to be so beautiful. Was that a struggle or was that easy? And it reminded me of The Hair with Amber Eyes as well, that is another favourite book of mine.
Yes.
I have a beautiful version, hard copy of that's similarly beautiful. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you. No, they did all of the work, and I'm just going to get the name of the artist because I always mispronounce it. So you won't have to keep going. Hello. I just realised you could probably see me doing that.
I've put the pages for you while you were.
Okay.
Because they are the stunning jellyfish on the end pages. Really.
So it's going to take me a moment because I'm just going to look it up on Instagram so I can give you her Instagram feed in a moment. But it was the designer at HarperCollins who put it together, and I did ask for like a little jellyfish inside. That's a gimbal. That's like, they're horrible. They're pretty, but they sting you. People in my swim club are still completely scarred from some of those gimbals, but here's a beautiful jellyfish up the back. No, it was all HarperCollins work. There was a designer and her name is Hazel Lamb that did that, and I think it's something like Yelena James, but I'm going to look this up in just one second. And I tell you, because it's being published in America as well, and the Americans saw it and they were just immediately like, that's exactly how we want to, that's exactly the cover we want to have. So they did such a good job. Thank you for asking, but I can take absolutely no credit for it. I was just extremely lucky.
Jude Berger. Jude, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Jude.
How are you, Julia?
Thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do. The question that I have, I thought might be held to the end. It's more, what are you working on now? Like, what's your next thing? I know obviously you'll be spruiking the book, but do you have another one lined up?
Well, do you know what? I was going to do another biography, Jude, and I do want to. And there's a couple of things I'm thinking about at the moment, but I'm a little bit worried about being able to get to archives. I had a look at some archives in New York in January, but I don't know, because I would have to go. There's a bunch of places I would have to go, and I'm worried about the travel. So there's also, I'm also think there's the phosphorescence process has made me think about a whole lot of this kind of stuff. So I might do more writing along the area of, you know, things that delight you, but it's as vague as I can be. I'm in that kind of like creative bubble right now where I'm just reading a lot and thinking about and jotting stuff down. But I think I might have to wait before I do my biography. I think. I was right. It's Yelena James is the name of this artist. And I'll tell you, look, that's her other artwork. She's on Instagram. Isn't that freaky?
It is freaky. I got to be honest. I thought it was a broken phone at first.
Yeah. No, that's the back. It's a Yelena James like art design. Alice, the publicist at HarperCollins, sent me a link to it, and I just got it. She really does very beautiful stuff. So I'm so happy to have her on the cover. Anyway, Jude, so that's completely imprecise. I'll get back to you when I have anything firmed up.
That's a very good answer. One of the things, you've touched on it a few times, but one of the things I liked in the book that seemed important to me and potentially difficult at the moment is how beautifully you write about the importance of people and community. And your swimming club is a prime example of that. It made me think about, you have an account very early in the book of thinking about Oscar Wilde while you're swimming. And it made me think, I don't know if you read, there was a piece Zadie Smith wrote when Philip Roth died. And she reflected on the fact that both of them were keen swimmers, like would do lap swimming. Right. And he asked her what she thought about when she swam. And she said, She would think first length, second length, third length, and that was all she would think, and she felt very dull. And he said, I choose a year, say 1953, then I think about what happened in my life or within my circle, then what happened in the city, then the country, then the world, and so on. And Smith says, that made me laugh. The energy, the reach, the precision, the breadth, the curiosity, the will, the intelligence. Roth in the swimming pool was no different than Roth at his desk. He was a writer all the way down.
That's so good.
And I loved, you know, you write about how important the swimming is for you socially and everything else, but as meditation, clearly your mind is racing to that next biography, that next trip, that next project. Yeah. Is that what you use swimming for?
It's definitely a meditative thing, absolutely. I mean, I love that I can see different things. I'm missing my swimming group at the moment. We can't all meet. I can swim with like one other person, but and we can't swim at the normal time. But I didn't realize when I first began it, I really thought it was about exercise and getting me out of bed in the morning, because I'm not a morning person. But over time, and actually especially when I was going through rubbish times, I did realize how good that is for your mental health. I don't know what it is, you know, I mean, it's a little bit like yoga and meditation when people talk about the monkey mind and you kind of just throw random thoughts out, but then you'll suddenly get an insight. I was talking to John O'Leneen, who wrote that book on walking recently, and he talks about how walking, like kind of just steady, repetitive exercise can get the creative thing going in your brain. But really, to me, it's more like kind of emptying out the junk on the sand. It just clears my brain, and then I can start much clearer in the morning. It's like morning pages. I don't know if you've ever done that. Julia Cameron talks about for creative people just to sit down and write 3 pages in the morning. And the swimming is a bit similar. I think you're just clearing stuff out.
We have a question from Vicki that I think follows on nicely from that.
Hi there, Julia. Just part way through your book, thank you. I was wondering, if we find that we've lost touch with awe, where would you suggest we start waking ourselves up to it again?
Where did you find it last time, Vicki?
Walking through wetlands, probably, in nature.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more that, to be honest, it's more just thinking about it and realizing that that's just, we want to get our exercise. We want to, cook things for our family, get some work done, see some people. And it's more like factoring that into your thinking. You never think about it as a necessity, right? Which is why I think exercising outdoors is so great, because you're bound to see, beautiful things or wondrous things. So, it's more about, you will know the things that have given you that experience in the past, and it's more about kind of going to that and making yourself do it. And then you probably would find ways of exploring it. Other ways to do it might kind of occur to you when you were there. For me, the whole idea of it is really to be deliberate about it and to pursue it and to hunt it. Like, there's so many things I want to do. Now I've really made myself focus on it more. Around free diving, Mount Gambier, I'm desperate to go to the ponds there and kind of float along there. So just, allow yourself as though it's an imperative. I was listening to something on Delight the other day, and there was this woman being interviewed, and she had like 6 children and a husband, looked after them her whole life, and then they'd left home, and she was a widower. To her slight guilt and great pleasure, said she was discovering for the first time in her life delight, because she was allowing herself to hike and go salsa dancing and to read books and to kind of sleep in and all the rest of it. And it was so interesting to listen to, because she was so honest about it and a bit brutal with her daughter, who was like, didn't I give you delight before? She was like, no, not really. But yeah, just that sense of like building it into your day. I think that's the important thing, Vicki.
Thank you, Vicki. There's a question from Robin, and it echoes another question we had on the feed a little earlier. People curious about what you mean by let your life be your witness, what that phrase means to you.
That means that I feel, as Carol was saying before, Carol Reed was saying that, that there's a lot of talk around faith. There's a lot of talk about doing the right thing and being the right thing. And I really resonated with me when Helen Garner wrote in her book wrote the story about her friendship with Tim Winton, and how in the 1980s she was living with that flatmate that she called the born-again Christian, and then that flatmate was like salivating because Tim Winton was coming to town, and, you know, he's a Christian. He'd had an evangelical upbringing, but it, you know, explored spirituality in other ways, which an evangelical would think he'd probably become a bit loose. And so I was really excited about having him over, and Helen couldn't bear it, went off for a walk and came back, and Tim was sitting there and the Bible was just on the table in front of them, and the flatmate had gone off to do something. And she said, "What happened?" And Tim said, "Well, I just said to him, mate, why don't you just give the book a rest and let your life be your witness?" And to me, that's like, for all the people don't need to be told really how to live. People don't need to be judged and told how to live their lives, but there's a lot of need for people to be looked after and cared for and all that kind of stuff. And I've had people in my life, like my mother, who's modeled like kind of just grace and gorgeousness her whole life. And to me, she's got like such a shiny faith. So it's really about living out what you want to be. And if your faith is modeled on love, then you witness that instead of telling other people what they're doing wrong. It's really as simple as that.
It would seem to be a lot less simple than that for many people. I think the emphasis on the ways in which this book feels timely or prescient, part of what that response is capturing is that anything that encourages us to take notice and take care and look at the world around us and look for awe and wonder is incredibly welcome at this time. And hopefully this strange moment we find ourselves in gives us a chance to reflect properly. And certainly having a book like Phosphorescence to do it over makes it that much easier. I'm going to ask you all to join me in thanking the extraordinary Julia Baird. Thrust this book on everyone you can, but thrust.
Yep, I want Phosphorescence thrust on people.
Wonder or down your throat. Thanks, Julia.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in. Thank you. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Julia. What a wonderful discussion. Thanks, everybody who asked questions as well. We'll be doing this monthly, so please stay tuned to Guardian Australia and Australia at Home to find out what the next session is going to be. And lastly, a big thanks to all the sponsors of Australia at Home as well. So that's Essential Media, Principal Co, the Centre for Australian Progress, the Community Council of Australia, and Guardian Australia. They host a new discussion every weekday here. Next week's schedule includes the Political Geek Fest with Guardian Australia's Catherine Murphy and a discussion on the future of tertiary education, and Osman Faruqi talking to his mum, Mehreen, about Ramadan. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.